Picture this. London, December 1925. Snow falls silently over Lincoln's Inn, one of England's most sacred legal institutions. Inside these ancient chambers, where justice has been practiced for 6 centuries, a man sits dying at his desk, not from old age, not from illness, but from poison mixed into his own ink. Every word he writes brings him closer to death, yet he continues writing, desperate to finish a document that will expose the most powerful conspiracy in British legal history. This is the story of Edmund Hartwell's final testament, a lawyer's last words that became more dangerous than any murder weapon and more powerful than any judge's verdict. But to understand why someone was willing to commit murder to silence these words, we must first understand the web of corruption that had been growing in the shadows of London's most respected legal institution for decades. Main story begins. My name is Inspector William Hartley, and in my 40 years of investigating London's most complex crimes, I've learned that the most dangerous documents are often written in the simplest language. A lawyer's final words can be more powerful than a judge's verdict, and sometimes they're deadly enough to kill anyone who reads them. In December of 1925, when I found Solicitor Edmund Hartwell dead in his chambers at Lincoln's Inn, his last testament revealed a conspiracy that threatened to destroy the British legal system itself. If I could solve his murder before the killers eliminated everyone who knew the truth, a lawyer's final words can be more powerful than a judge's verdict. When I found Solicitor Edmund Hartwell dead in his chambers at Lincoln's Inn, his last testament revealed a conspiracy that threatened to destroy the British legal system itself. If I could solve his murder before the killers eliminated everyone who knew the truth, and before that truth died with him in the ancient halls of justice. The December snow had fallen thick over London that evening, blanketing the city in a pristine white that transformed even the sooty industrial districts into scenes of Victorian elegance. But nowhere was the transformation more striking than in Lincoln's Inn, where the medieval architecture and gas-lit courtyards created an atmosphere of timeless legal tradition that seemed untouched by the modern world. Lincoln's Inn was more than just a collection of barristers' chambers. It was the beating heart of the British legal system, a place where law had been practiced continuously for over 6 centuries. The ancient buildings housed some of England's most distinguished legal minds, men whose decisions shaped the course of justice and whose reputations were built on generations of professional excellence. But on this cold December night, I would discover that beneath the venerable facade of legal tradition lay a cancer of corruption that had been growing unchecked for years. The murder of Edmund Hartwell was not an isolated crime, but the desperate act of conspirators who would stop at nothing to protect secrets that reached into the highest levels of British society. I had been summoned there at 11:30 that evening by Mr. Geoffrey Pemberton, the inn's head porter and night watchman, whose telephone call had been notable for its restraint and formality, even while reporting what appeared to be murder. "Inspector Hartley," he had said in the careful tones of someone accustomed to handling sensitive matters with discretion, "I regret to inform you that we have a situation requiring police attention. Mr. Edmund Hartwell has been found deceased in his chambers under circumstances that appear irregular." Edmund Hartwell, I recognized the name immediately. One of London's most prominent solicitors, a man whose client list included members of Parliament, industrial magnates, and even members of the royal household. If Hartwell had been murdered, the implications could reach into the highest levels of British society. The chambers of Lincoln's Inn were arranged around a series of courtyards that had changed little since medieval times, creating a maze of staircases, corridors, and offices that would be familiar to barristers from centuries past. Gas lamps flickered in wrought iron brackets along the walls, casting dancing shadows that made the ancient stonework seem alive with movement. Mr. Pemberton met me at the main gate, a distinguished gentleman of perhaps 60 years, whose formal manner and precise speech marked him as someone who took his responsibilities seriously. He wore the traditional porter's uniform and carried himself with the dignity that came from serving one of England's most prestigious legal institutions. "Inspector," he said, leading me through snow-covered courtyards toward the building that housed Hartwell's chambers, "I discovered Mr. Hartwell approximately 1 hour ago during my regular evening rounds. The circumstances of his death are most unusual." As we walked through the ancient courtyards, Pemberton explained the security procedures that governed access to the chambers after hours. Lincoln's Inn maintained strict protocols for monitoring visitors, recording the identity of anyone who entered the buildings, and requiring legitimate business purposes for after-hours access. "The security arrangements make unauthorized entry extremely difficult, Inspector. Everyone who enters must sign the visitor's log, and I personally verify the identity and business of anyone who requests access to the chambers during evening hours." "And last night, did anyone visit Mr. Hartwell's chambers?" "Several individuals, Inspector, all of whom had legitimate business with Mr. Hartwell. Sir Reginald Blackwood arrived at approximately 7 o'clock for what he described as a consultation on a complex inheritance matter. Mr. Timothy Morrison, Hartwell's clerk, remained until 8:30 to complete filing of court documents, and Mr. Charles Whitmore from the Crown Prosecution Service visited at 9 o'clock to discuss an upcoming trial. 3 visitors, all with apparent legitimate business, all with access to Hartwell's chambers during the crucial hours before his death. The investigation would need to examine each of these individuals carefully to determine who might have had both opportunity and motive for murder." "Tell me what you found." "Mr. Hartwell was seated at his desk in his private office, apparently working on legal documents. The door to his chambers was locked from the inside, the key still in the lock. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle, yet Mr. Hartwell appears to have been poisoned. A locked room mystery in one of London's most secure legal institutions. Already the case was taking on the characteristics of something far more complex than a simple professional dispute." But as we approached Hartwell's chambers, Pemberton revealed additional details that would prove crucial to understanding both the method and motive for the murder. "Inspector, I must tell you that Mr. Hartwell had been expressing concerns about his personal safety for several weeks. He mentioned receiving threatening correspondence and had requested that I pay particular attention to monitoring visitors to his chambers." "What kind of threats?" "He did not provide specifics, Inspector, but he mentioned that his current legal research was uncovering information that certain individuals preferred to keep confidential. He seemed to believe that his investigation posed a significant threat to some very powerful people." Consider this: a prominent solicitor found dead in locked chambers within one of England's most secure legal institutions. What kind of legal document could be so dangerous that someone would risk everything to prevent its completion? And how do you commit murder in a place where every visitor is recorded and every movement monitored? Solicitor Edmund Hartwell's chambers were located on the 2nd floor of Staple Inn, a building that had housed legal offices since the 14th century. The rooms themselves reflected both the ancient traditions of the legal profession and the modern requirements of a successful practice. Oak-paneled walls lined with law books, Persian carpets covering polished wooden floors, and electric desk lamps, providing the bright illumination necessary for detailed legal work. But it was the scene in Hartwell's private office that immediately captured my attention. The solicitor sat slumped in his leather chair, behind an imposing mahogany desk, a man of perhaps 55 years, whose distinguished appearance was marred only by the evidence of sudden death. His evening clothes were impeccable, his gray hair neatly combed, but his face showed the unmistakable signs of poisoning: dilated pupils, cyanotic lips, and the rictus grimace that indicated death had come quickly, but not peacefully. More importantly, Spread across his desk were the materials for drafting a legal document of unusual significance. Multiple sheets of parchment bore Hartwell's careful handwriting, along with sealing wax, ribbons, and the other paraphernalia required for creating a formal will or legal testament. But this was no ordinary document. The few lines I could read without disturbing the scene suggested that Hartwell had been documenting information that could destroy reputations and end careers throughout the British legal establishment. The document appeared to be what legal professionals called a final testament, not a will in the traditional sense, but a comprehensive record of important information that a solicitor wished to preserve in case of unexpected death. Such documents typically contained details about ongoing cases, client confidences that needed to be protected, and sometimes evidence of professional misconduct that required official attention. But Hartwell's final testament was far more explosive than the typical professional document. The pages I could examine revealed references to systematic corruption involving dozens of prominent legal figures, detailed descriptions of cases where justice had been perverted for political purposes, and financial records showing payments totaling hundreds of thousands of pounds in bribes and illegal fees. "Mr. Pemberton," I said, carefully examining the desk without touching anything, "what kind of document was Mr. Hartwell preparing? This appears to be more than a simple will. I believe it was what we call a final testament, Inspector, a document that solicitors sometimes prepare to ensure that important information is preserved in case of their sudden death. It's not legally binding like a will, but it can contain vital information about ongoing cases and client confidences. And who would have known that Mr. Hartwell was preparing such a document? Very few people, Inspector. Perhaps his clerk, Mr. Timothy Morrison, and possibly some of his senior partners. The preparation of a final testament is typically a private matter, undertaken when a solicitor believes he may be in danger, or when he possesses information that others might want to suppress. Which suggested that Edmund Hartwell had been killed not for personal reasons, but to prevent the completion and distribution of whatever secrets he had been documenting in his final testament. The examination of Hartwell's desk revealed several important clues about both the nature of his final document and the method of his murder. The inkwell showed signs of recent contamination, traces of a white powder that had been mixed with the ink, ensuring that any attempt to write would introduce poison directly into the victim's system through cuts or abrasions on his fingers. The poison had been chosen with diabolical cleverness. Strychnine powder mixed with ink would be virtually undetectable until the victim began to experience symptoms, and by then it would be too late to seek medical attention. The killer had counted on Hartwell's scholarly dedication, his habit of working late into the night on important documents, to ensure that the poison had sufficient time to take effect before help could arrive. More significantly, the partially completed testament contained references to what Hartwell called the Lincoln's Inn conspiracy, a systematic scheme involving several prominent barristers who had been manipulating legal proceedings for financial and political gain. The document named specific individuals and detailed their methods of corruption, creating a record that would have destroyed careers and sent several of London's most respected legal figures to prison. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. According to Hartwell's documentation, the criminal scheme involved not just individual corruption, but the systematic subversion of justice for political purposes. Cases had been manipulated to protect government officials from prosecution. Evidence had been suppressed to prevent embarrassing revelations about prominent families, and witnesses had been intimidated or eliminated to ensure that certain truths never reached public attention. "Mr. Pemberton, I need to speak with everyone who had access to these chambers in the past week, and I want to know everything about this conspiracy that Mr. Hartwell was documenting. Inspector, I must caution you that the matters Mr. Hartwell was investigating involved some of the most powerful figures in the British legal system. If his allegations were true, the scandal could undermine public confidence in the entire justice system. But that was precisely why someone had been willing to commit murder to prevent the testament's completion. The conspiracy that Hartwell had uncovered was valuable enough to kill for, and powerful enough to reach into the heart of Lincoln's Inn itself. The investigation would prove to be one of the most challenging of my career, not because of its technical complexity, but because of the web of powerful interests that had been threatened by Hartwell's research. Every lead would take me deeper into a world where justice was for sale, and where the most respected members of society were willing to commit any crime to protect their secrets. Think about this. A conspiracy so powerful that it reaches into the highest levels of the British legal system, documented by a solicitor who was killed before he could reveal the truth. How deep does corruption go when even the guardians of justice become criminals? And who can you trust when the law itself has been compromised? The investigation led me first to Timothy Morrison, Hartwell's clerk, and the person most likely to have knowledge of his recent activities and concerns. I found Morrison in the clerk's office, adjacent to Hartwell's chambers, a nervous young man of perhaps 25 years, who clearly understood the gravity of his employer's death. Morrison was not just a clerk in the traditional sense, but a qualified barrister who had been working under Hartwell's guidance while building his own legal practice. His intimate knowledge of Hartwell's cases and investigative methods would make him invaluable to understanding both the scope of the conspiracy and the specific threats that had led to murder. "Mr. Morrison," I said, settling into a chair beside his cluttered desk, "I need you to tell me everything you know about Mr. Hartwell's final testament and the conspiracy he was investigating." Inspector Mr. Hartwell had been working for months to gather evidence about irregularities in several high-profile legal cases. He believed that certain barristers were collaborating to manipulate juries, suppress evidence, and ensure favorable outcomes for clients willing to pay substantial bribes. Morrison's account revealed the systematic nature of the corruption that Hartwell had uncovered. The conspiracy was not a recent development, but had been operating for at least 5 years, growing more sophisticated and ambitious as its leaders gained confidence in their ability to manipulate the legal system without detection. The scheme began with relatively minor cases, Inspector: insurance disputes, commercial litigation, inheritance matters, where the stakes were significant but not enormous. But as the conspirators gained experience and confidence, they began targeting major criminal cases, political prosecutions, and even matters involving national security. What kind of evidence did he collect? Financial records showing unusual payments to jurors and court officials, correspondence between barristers coordinating their strategies in cases where they should have been adversaries, testimony from witnesses who had been intimidated or bribed to change their statements, and most damaging of all, documentation showing that certain cases were assigned to specific judges who were part of the conspiracy. The corruption extended to the judiciary itself, judges who could be counted on to make rulings that favored the conspiracy's interests, regardless of legal precedent or factual evidence. Such systematic judicial corruption was virtually unprecedented in British legal history, and would indeed threaten the foundations of the entire justice system if exposed. And he was documenting all of this in his final testament. Yes, Inspector, Mr. Hartwell believed that the conspiracy was so extensive and well protected that normal legal channels could not be trusted. He was creating a complete record that could be distributed to newspapers and government officials if anything happened to him. Who else knew about this investigation? Morrison's face grew pale as he considered the implications of the question. Several people, Inspector. Mr. Hartwell had been making inquiries throughout Lincoln's Inn, questioning colleagues about unusual cases and suspicious activities. Anyone involved in the conspiracy would have known that he was investigating them. I need names, Mr. Morrison, everyone who might have known about the investigation, and everyone who had access to Mr. Hartwell's chambers. The list that Morrison provided was extensive and disturbing. It included 3 of Lincoln's Inn's most senior barristers, 2 circuit judges who frequently heard cases in London, several court officials whose positions would have given them access to juries and evidence, and even clerks and administrators whose cooperation would have been essential for manipulating case assignments and court schedules. More troubling was the revelation that each of these individuals had legitimate reasons to visit Hartwell's chambers and the knowledge necessary to access his office after hours. The conspiracy had been operating from within the heart of the legal establishment itself, protected by the very traditions of collegial trust and professional courtesy that made Lincoln's Inn function effectively. But it was Morrison's description of recent events that provided the most significant breakthrough in the case. He revealed that Hartwell had received several threatening letters in the past month, warning him to abandon his investigation and threatening consequences if he continued to gather evidence about the conspiracy. "Mr. Morrison, do you still have these threatening letters?" Mr. Hartwell kept them in his private safe, Inspector. He said they were evidence of obstruction of justice and that they would be included in his final testament. The safe was located behind a portrait of Queen Victoria in Hartwell's office, concealed in a way that would have been invisible to casual visitors, but accessible to anyone who knew its location. The combination had been written in Hartwell's appointment book, using a simple code that Morrison was able to decipher. Inside the safe, I found not only the threatening letters, but also a complete draft of Hartwell's final testament, a document that named specific individuals, detailed their criminal activities, and provided evidence that would have resulted in multiple prosecutions and the complete reorganization of London's legal establishment. The final testament was a masterpiece of legal documentation, methodically organized and meticulously researched. Hartwell had approached his investigation with the same attention to detail that characterized his professional legal work, creating a document that would have been virtually impossible to challenge or discredit. The evidence included bank records showing suspicious financial transactions, copies of altered court documents, recorded conversations with witnesses who had been intimidated, and even photographs of meetings between conspirators who should have had no professional contact with each other. But perhaps most damaging were the detailed case studies that Hartwell had prepared, showing exactly how specific trials had been manipulated to achieve predetermined outcomes. The document demonstrated not just that corruption existed, but precisely how it operated and who was responsible for its execution. Here's what we're discovering: a conspiracy that has systematically corrupted the British justice system for years, involving judges, barristers, court officials, and even government connections. But creating such detailed documentation required months of dangerous investigation. How many people did Hartwell have to trust to gather this evidence? And which one of them betrayed him to his killers? The threatening letters revealed a pattern of escalating intimidation that had driven Hartwell to complete his final testament with increasing urgency. The earliest letters were relatively subtle, suggesting that his investigation was misguided and that he should focus on more productive professional activities. But the more recent correspondence was explicitly threatening, warning that accidents can happen to solicitors who interfere with matters beyond their understanding. What made the letters particularly sinister was their demonstration of intimate knowledge about Hartwell's daily routine and personal life. The writers knew about confidential client meetings, private conversations with other barristers, details about his family members, and even information about his health and financial situation. This level of surveillance suggested that the conspiracy had resources and capabilities far beyond what would be expected from a simple network of corrupt lawyers. Someone with access to government intelligence capabilities had been monitoring Hartwell's activities, or the conspiracy included members with connections to such resources. "Mr. Morrison," I said, studying the correspondence, These letters suggest that someone has been monitoring Mr. Hartwell's activities very closely. Who would have had access to this kind of detailed information about his daily routine? The list would be quite limited, Inspector. Mr. Hartwell was a private man who shared personal information only with his closest professional associates and family members. What about his partners in the firm? Would they have known about his investigation? Mr. Hartwell was careful not to involve other partners directly, Inspector. He believed that the conspiracy might include members of his own firm, and he wanted to protect them from both knowledge of his activities and potential retaliation. But the evidence suggested that someone within Hartwell's immediate professional circle had been monitoring his investigation and reporting his activities to the conspiracy members. The question was whether this person was an unwitting informant or an active participant in the criminal scheme. Morrison revealed that Hartwell had become increasingly paranoid in recent weeks, varying his daily routine, conducting sensitive meetings in locations outside his chambers, and even using coded language in telephone conversations. Such extreme security measures suggested that he had identified specific threats and was taking active steps to protect himself. Inspector, there's something else you should know, Morrison said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Mr. Hartwell believed that the conspiracy extended beyond the legal profession. He had found evidence suggesting connections to government ministries, intelligence services, and even members of parliament. What kind of connections? Cases where government officials who should have been prosecuted for corruption were instead protected by manipulated trials. Evidence suggesting that sensitive state secrets were being leaked to foreign governments through legal channels. Financial records showing payments from overseas sources to members of the conspiracy. The implications were staggering. If Hartwell's investigation was accurate, the conspiracy involved not just legal corruption, but potential treason and espionage. Such revelations would indeed threaten the stability of the government itself and provide powerful motives for murder. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While examining Hartwell's appointment book for clues about his recent activities, I discovered a pattern of meetings that initially seemed routine, but revealed their true significance when compared with the threatening letters. For the past month, Hartwell had been meeting regularly with Sir Reginald Blackwood, one of Lincoln's Inn's most senior barristers, and a man whose reputation for integrity was legendary throughout the legal profession. But the timing of these meetings corresponded exactly with the escalation of threats against Hartwell, suggesting that Blackwood was not the trusted ally he appeared to be. Mr. Morrison, tell me about Mr. Hartwell's relationship with Sir Reginald Blackwood. They had worked together on several important cases over the years, Inspector. Mr. Hartwell respected Sir Reginald's legal expertise and often consulted with him on complex matters of jurisprudence. And recently, had their relationship changed in any way? Mr. Hartwell had become cautious in his interactions with Sir Reginald. He seemed to suspect that information shared in confidence was not remaining confidential. Morrison revealed that Hartwell had begun testing Blackwood's trustworthiness by sharing false information about his investigation, and then monitoring whether that information appeared in the threatening letters or was acted upon by the conspiracy. This careful counterintelligence work had apparently confirmed Hartwell's suspicions about Blackwood's true loyalties. Inspector, I believe Mr. Hartwell had concluded that Sir Reginald was not just aware of the conspiracy, but was actually one of its leaders. His reputation for integrity made him the perfect coordinator for criminal activities that depended on maintaining public trust in the legal system. The pattern was becoming clear. Sir Reginald Blackwood, the man trusted by colleagues throughout Lincoln's Inn, had been using his position to monitor Hartwell's investigation and coordinate the conspiracy's response to the threat he posed. His legendary reputation for integrity had provided the perfect cover for criminal activities that could have continued indefinitely if Hartwell had not begun to uncover the truth. But proving Blackwood's guilt would require more than circumstantial evidence and suspicious timing. I needed to catch him in the act of criminal behavior, or find physical evidence that connected him directly to Hartwell's murder. The conspiracy reaches to the very top of Britain's legal establishment, protected by the most trusted figures in the profession. But Hartwell's methodical investigation has created a trail of evidence that could expose everyone involved if we can follow it before the conspirators eliminate all the witnesses. The clock is ticking, and more lives hang in the balance. The next phase of the investigation required careful planning and considerable risk. If Sir Reginald Blackwood was indeed coordinating the conspiracy's activities, he would be monitoring police efforts to solve Hartwell's murder and taking steps to eliminate any evidence that could expose the criminal network. I decided to employ a strategy that Hartwell himself might have used: careful counterintelligence designed to flush out the conspiracy's true scope and leadership. Working with Morrison, I began spreading carefully crafted misinformation about our investigation, different versions told to different suspects, to see which information would appear in the conspiracy's responses. The results were revealing and alarming. Within hours of sharing false information about discovering Hartwell's backup documentation with Sir Reginald, several witnesses who had provided information to Hartwell began receiving renewed threats. When I told another suspect that we had identified a key witness, that individual mysteriously disappeared from London entirely. Most disturbing was the discovery that our investigation itself was being monitored by someone with access to official police communications. Information that should have been confidential to Scotland Yard was clearly reaching the conspiracy's leadership, suggesting that their influence extended into law enforcement itself. "Morrison," I said during one of our clandestine meetings in a Holborn coffee house, "we need to assume that everything we discuss in official channels is being reported to the conspiracy. From now on, we communicate only through unofficial means, and we trust no one connected to the legal establishment. Inspector, if they have informants within Scotland Yard itself, how can we proceed with the investigation? Any arrests we attempt could be anticipated and prevented. By using their own methods against them, we'll create false evidence, plant misleading information, and force them to reveal themselves through their reactions to threats that don't actually exist." The plan we developed was complex and dangerous, but it offered the best chance of exposing the conspiracy's leadership while protecting the few honest witnesses who remained alive. We would create the appearance of having discovered devastating evidence against specific members of the conspiracy, then monitor their responses to determine who was coordinating the criminal activities. The first test involved Sir Reginald Blackwood directly. Through Morrison, I arranged for word to reach Blackwood that we had discovered Hartwell's insurance policy, a complete backup copy of his final testament that had been hidden outside Lincoln's Inn for safekeeping. The response was immediate and revealing. Within 6 hours, Morrison's lodgings were burgled, though nothing of value was taken. A fire of unknown origin destroyed a storage facility where Hartwell had occasionally kept case files. And most telling of all, I received a visit from a senior Scotland Yard official who suggested that my investigation was proceeding along unproductive lines, and that I should consider more conventional explanations for Hartwell's death. The conspiracy's reach into Scotland Yard itself explained how they had been able to operate with impunity for so long. Any investigation that threatened their activities could be misdirected, delayed, or terminated entirely through official channels. The corruption extended far beyond the legal profession into the very institutions responsible for enforcing the law. But the conspiracy's responses also revealed their weakness. Their need to react quickly to perceived threats meant that they were exposing their methods and personnel in ways that could be tracked and documented. Each action they took to protect themselves provided additional evidence of their criminal activities. The critical breakthrough came when I discovered that the senior Scotland Yard official who had attempted to redirect my investigation was not actually authorized to issue such instructions. Commander Richardson was indeed a legitimate police official, but his suggestion that I abandon the Hartwell investigation had not been approved by his superiors and represented a personal initiative to protect the conspiracy. Morrison, we've identified our informant within Scotland Yard. Commander Richardson has been feeding information to the conspiracy and attempting to manipulate police investigations that threaten their activities. But how do we proceed, Inspector? If we report Richardson's activities through official channels, he'll be warned and will have the opportunity to destroy evidence or flee. We don't use official channels. We gather enough evidence to prove his corruption, then present it directly to the Home Secretary and demand a complete investigation of police involvement in the conspiracy. Now we see the full scope of the corruption. Not just lawyers and judges, but police officials, government administrators, and who knows how many others. The conspiracy has infected every level of Britain's justice system, but each defensive move they make exposes more of their network. Sometimes the best way to catch criminals is to make them think they're being hunted. The evidence against Commander Richardson was not difficult to obtain once we knew what to look for. His financial records showed unexplained income that corresponded with major cases where police investigations had been mysteriously terminated or misdirected. His personal correspondence included coded communications with known members of the legal conspiracy. Most damning was the discovery of a private meeting between Richardson and Sir Reginald Blackwood on the very evening of Hartwell's murder. Hotel records showed that they had dined together at the Savoy, discussing what Richardson's notes described as coordination of response to current security threat. But gathering evidence against Richardson also revealed the true scope of the conspiracy's infiltration of government institutions. The criminal network included not just individual corrupt officials, but systematic penetration of multiple ministries and departments. They had created a shadow government that could manipulate official policy for their own ends. Inspector, Morrison said during one of our secret meetings, I've been analyzing the financial records from Hartwell's investigation. The scale of the operation is enormous. We're talking about millions of pounds in illegal payments and hundreds of manipulated cases over the past 5 years. Who's coordinating something this complex? The level of organization suggests leadership with substantial administrative and financial resources. That's what Mr. Hartwell was investigating when he was killed. He believed he had identified the conspiracy's ultimate leadership, but he never shared that information with me. The answer was hidden in Hartwell's final testament, in sections that had been written in a private code that Morrison had not been able to decipher. But working together, we gradually broke the code and revealed the most shocking information in the entire document. The conspiracy was not just a criminal enterprise, but an intelligence operation with connections to foreign governments. Several members of the network were receiving payments from German and Soviet sources in exchange for sensitive information about British legal and political affairs. Morrison, this isn't just corruption, it's espionage on a massive scale. The conspiracy has been systematically betraying British state secrets through manipulated legal proceedings. That would explain the level of resources and organization, Inspector. If they're being funded and directed by foreign intelligence services, they would have capabilities far beyond what domestic criminals could achieve. The espionage connection also explained the conspiracy's desperate efforts to prevent Hartwell's investigation from succeeding. Exposure of their activities would not just result in criminal prosecutions, but would reveal a massive intelligence breach that could compromise national security for years to come. but it also provided new opportunities for gathering evidence and identifying the conspiracy's leadership. Foreign intelligence operations require sophisticated communication and coordination that leave traces that can be detected and analyzed by those who know what to look for. Working with contacts in military intelligence who were outside the compromised civilian law enforcement system, I began tracking the conspiracy's communications and financial transactions. The pattern that emerged revealed a network even more extensive than Hartwell had imagined. The conspiracy included members of parliament who had been manipulating legislation to benefit foreign interests, judges who had been ensuring that certain espionage cases never reached trial, and even clerks in sensitive government departments who had been providing classified information to foreign agents. Inspector Morrison said, after reviewing the intelligence analysis, "If this information is accurate, the conspiracy represents the most successful penetration of British government in history. They've essentially captured significant portions of our legal and political system, which is why they were willing to commit murder to protect it. The stakes are high enough that they'll eliminate anyone who threatens to expose their activities." The trap I set for Sir Reginald Blackwood was simple in concept, but complex in execution. I arranged for Timothy Morrison to let it be known throughout Lincoln's Inn that Hartwell's final testament had been completed before his death and hidden somewhere in his chambers. The bait was irresistible. Anyone involved in the conspiracy would need to find and destroy the document before it could be discovered by authorities. That evening, I concealed myself in Hartwell's chambers with 2 constables, waiting to see who would attempt to retrieve the supposedly hidden testament. The wait was not long. At midnight, we heard the soft sound of a key in the lock, followed by careful footsteps moving through the outer office toward Hartwell's private room. Sir Reginald Blackwood entered the office with the confidence of someone who belonged there, carrying an electric torch and moving directly to locations where important documents might be hidden. His familiarity with the layout of the chambers confirmed that he had been there many times before, probably gathering intelligence about Hartwell's investigation for months. But it was his reaction to discovering our presence that provided the final confirmation of his guilt. Instead of the surprise and confusion that an innocent person would show, Blackwood immediately attempted to destroy evidence by throwing several documents into the fireplace and lighting them with a match he had brought for that purpose. "Sir Reginald," I said, stepping from the shadows with my constables, "I need to place you under arrest for the murder of Edmund Hartwell and conspiracy to pervert the course of justice." His distinguished facade crumbled immediately, replaced by the desperate expression of a man whose carefully constructed criminal empire was collapsing around him. "Inspector," he said, making one final attempt at manipulation, "you don't understand the complexity of the situation. The legal system requires flexibility to function effectively. Sometimes rigid adherence to rules prevents justice from being served. By bribing juries and intimidating witnesses, by ensuring that the right outcomes are achieved, regardless of technicalities that might otherwise interfere with appropriate verdicts, Britain faces threats that require unconventional responses, and sometimes the traditional legal system is inadequate to address those threats." But his attempted justification only confirmed the extent of his criminal activities. Sir Reginald Blackwood had spent years convincing himself that corruption was a form of patriotism, that manipulating legal proceedings was actually a service to national security. He is the ultimate irony. A man who justified treason as patriotism, who betrayed his country while claiming to protect it. But now we have him, and through him, we can unravel the entire conspiracy. Sometimes the most dangerous criminals are those who believe their crimes serve a higher purpose. The documents that Blackwood had attempted to destroy provided crucial evidence about the scope of the conspiracy and the methods used to corrupt legal proceedings, but they also revealed something even more sinister. The conspiracy was not just a criminal enterprise or even an espionage operation. It was part of a broader effort to undermine British democratic institutions in preparation for potential foreign intervention. Financial records showed payments totaling hundreds of thousands of pounds from German sources, with additional funding from Soviet agents who were working to destabilize Western European governments. The conspiracy members were not just corrupt officials seeking personal enrichment, but active agents working to weaken Britain's ability to respond to external threats. Sir Reginald, how long have you been working for foreign intelligence services? You misunderstand the nature of our activities, Inspector. We were not working for foreign governments, but with them to address threats that transcend national boundaries. The rise of international communism requires coordinated responses that traditional legal systems cannot provide. By destroying the British legal system from within, by ensuring that it serves the broader interests of Western civilization, rather than being constrained by outdated procedural requirements and sentimental attachments to individual rights. His justification revealed the ideological framework that had allowed intelligent and educated individuals to justify systematic treason. Blackwood and his co-conspirators had convinced themselves that they were serving a higher cause that transcended loyalty to any particular nation or legal system. How did you poison Mr. Hartwell? The inkwell in his office was contaminated with a toxin that would have killed anyone who attempted to write with it. A simple matter of substitution, Inspector. I visited Edmund's chambers that afternoon to discuss a case, and while he was out of the room, I replaced his ink with a mixture containing strychnine powder. I knew he would be working late on his final testament, and the poison would ensure that the document was never completed. And you had no qualms about murdering a colleague whose only crime was pursuing justice. Edmund was threatening to destroy everything we had built, Inspector. The conspiracy provided essential intelligence services that protected Britain from threats that official channels could not address. His investigation threatened to expose operations that were vital to national security. But as Blackwood continued his confession, it became clear that his version of national security bore little resemblance to actual British interests. The conspiracy had been systematically betraying sensitive information to foreign governments, manipulating legal proceedings to protect enemy agents, and undermining public confidence in democratic institutions. The evidence we recovered from Blackwood's attempted destruction included communication codes, financial records, and operational plans that revealed the full scope of the espionage network. The information was immediately turned over to military intelligence for analysis and action against the remaining conspiracy members. The investigation that followed Blackwood's arrest led to the largest counterintelligence operation in British history, with dozens of arrests, and the exposure of espionage networks that had been operating for years. The scandal reached into every level of government and resulted in fundamental reforms in how sensitive information was protected and how foreign intelligence threats were detected. The trial of Sir Reginald Blackwood and his co-conspirators became one of the most significant legal proceedings in British history, exposing not only a carefully planned murder, but also espionage networks that had penetrated the highest levels of government. The proceedings were conducted under unprecedented security measures, with much of the evidence presented in closed sessions to protect ongoing counterintelligence operations. Blackwood was convicted of murder, treason, and conspiracy against the Crown, and sentenced to death. He was executed 6 months later at Pentonville Prison, maintaining until the end that his activities had been motivated by patriotic duty rather than personal gain. His final statement claimed that future generations would vindicate his actions as necessary responses to threats that democratic governments were too weak to address effectively. The broader investigation that followed Blackwood's arrest led to the prosecution of 37 additional individuals, including 2 members of Parliament, 4 circuit judges, 7 barristers, 12 government officials, and numerous clerks and administrators who had facilitated the conspiracy's activities. The scandal resulted in the resignation of 3 cabinet ministers and led to a complete reorganization of Britain's counterintelligence services. Timothy Morrison inherited much of Edmund Hartwell's practice and used the opportunity to establish new standards for legal ethics and professional responsibility. Under his leadership, the firm became known for its commitment to transparency and its refusal to compromise ethical principles for financial gain. Morrison also worked with government officials to develop new procedures for detecting and preventing foreign intelligence penetration of legal institutions. The Lincoln's Inn conspiracy also led to significant changes in how the legal profession policed itself, with new oversight bodies established to monitor professional conduct and investigate allegations of corruption. The ancient traditions of self-regulation that had allowed the conspiracy to flourish for years were replaced with external scrutiny and accountability. But perhaps the most important outcome of the case was the completion and controlled distribution of Edmund Hartwell's final testament. His detailed documentation of the conspiracy's activities provided not only evidence for criminal prosecutions, but also a comprehensive analysis of how democratic institutions could be subverted from within. The case taught me important lessons about the relationship between trust and accountability in professional institutions. The legal profession's traditions of self-regulation and collegial respect had created an environment where corruption could flourish unchecked, protected by the very reputation for integrity that made it possible. Most troubling was the realization that the conspiracy had been successful precisely because it had been led by individuals whose reputations were above suspicion. Sir Reginald Blackwood's legendary integrity had provided perfect cover for criminal activities that might have been detected immediately if they had been conducted by less respected figures. The case also highlighted the importance of individual courage in confronting institutional corruption. Edmund Hartwell had risked his career, and ultimately his life, to expose activities that his colleagues preferred to ignore. His final testament had become more than just a legal document. It was a moral challenge to an entire profession and society. The broader implications of the case extended far beyond the legal profession itself. The systematic penetration of British institutions by foreign intelligence services raised fundamental questions about the security of democratic governments and the vulnerability of open societies to subversion from within. In the months following the arrests, several former clients of conspiracy members came forward to report suspicious activities in their legal cases. Their testimonies revealed additional instances of corruption and espionage that had not been covered in the initial investigation, leading to further prosecutions and reforms. The international ramifications of the case were equally significant. The exposure of German and Soviet intelligence operations in Britain led to diplomatic protests and the expulsion of several foreign diplomats who had been coordinating with the conspiracy. Other European governments launched their own investigations to determine whether similar networks had been established in their countries. But the case that had begun with a single murder in a Lincoln's Inn chamber had revealed something much larger and more disturbing: a systematic attack on the foundations of democratic governance that had been growing beneath the surface of respectable institutions for years. The investigation taught me that professional communities, no matter how prestigious or well-regulated, could develop their own criminal subcultures when external pressures and foreign influence overwhelmed ethical constraints. The world of legal practice had appeared to be a bastion of respectability and justice, but beneath its polished surface lay vulnerabilities that had proved irresistible to those willing to betray their professional and national obligations. Perhaps most importantly, the case demonstrated that the most dangerous threats to democratic societies often came not from external enemies, but from internal corruption that exploited the very trust and openness that made democratic institutions function effectively. The conspiracy had succeeded for years precisely because it had been conducted by individuals whom society trusted to uphold its highest values. The reforms that followed the scandal were comprehensive and lasting. New procedures were established for background investigations of individuals in sensitive legal positions. International cooperation was enhanced to detect cross-border intelligence operations, and strict new penalties were imposed for professional misconduct that threatened national security. The legal profession responded to the scandal with fundamental changes in how practitioners were trained, monitored, and disciplined. Law schools instituted mandatory courses in professional ethics and national security awareness. Bar associations established new oversight mechanisms, and the traditional culture of self-regulation was supplemented with external accountability measures. But the most lasting legacy of the case was the recognition that institutional integrity required constant vigilance, and that the trust necessary for democratic governance could not be taken for granted. Edmund Hartwell's sacrifice had not only exposed a particular conspiracy, but had also demonstrated the eternal need for individuals willing to risk everything to protect the values that society claimed to cherish. The case of the solicitor's final will remains one of the most complex investigations of my career, not because of its technical challenges, but because of the profound questions it raised about loyalty, patriotism, and the responsibilities that come with professional expertise and social trust. Edmund Hartwell's final testament had indeed been more powerful than any judge's verdict, exposing corruption that formal legal proceedings had failed to detect, and creating a legacy of reform that would protect future generations from similar betrayals of public trust. Closing hook, final subscription call. And that, my friends, was how we solved the case of the solicitor's final will. A murder committed to silence a patriot, a conspiracy that corrupted the very heart of British justice, and a final testament that became more powerful in death than it ever could have been in life. Edmund Hartwell's courage in documenting the truth ultimately destroyed the corruption he died trying to expose. The case demonstrated that the most dangerous enemies of democratic societies are often those who hide behind the most respectable facades, using their professional prestige and social trust to shield treasonous activities from detection and prosecution. Sir Reginald Blackwood's legendary reputation for integrity made him the perfect leader for a conspiracy that depended on public confidence in legal institutions. But the case also showed that individual moral courage can triumph over even the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies. Hartwell's methodical investigation and careful documentation provided the tools necessary to expose and destroy a network that might otherwise have continued its treasonous activities indefinitely. What did you think of today's legal thriller? Did you suspect that the conspiracy reached beyond simple corruption into actual espionage and treason? Could you have identified the signs of foreign intelligence penetration that had been hidden beneath the veneer of professional respectability? Most importantly, what did this case teach you about the price of maintaining democratic institutions in the face of determined enemies? How do we balance the openness and trust necessary for democratic governance with the security measures required to protect against subversion from within? Remember that a lawyer's final words can indeed be more powerful than a judge's verdict, especially when those words contain truths that others would kill to suppress. In the world of law, as in life, justice depends not on institutional prestige, but on individual courage to speak truth to power, regardless of the personal cost. This has been Detective Stories Audiobooks, where every mystery teaches us something new about the complex relationship between power, corruption, and the individuals brave enough to challenge both. Until next time, remember, trust, but verify. Even the most respected institutions require constant vigilance to prevent them from becoming instruments of the very corruption they were created to prevent.